is poverty a reason or an excuse why people commit crimes? Now, the reason I'm asking that is in London, we have a really big problem with knife crime and a lot of murders caused by people stabbing people. And I've heard different discussions on the radio and on television, and it's been said that poverty is a reason for the crime and for these stabbings and stuff, which I don't agree with. Living in the United Kingdom over here, we're a pretty affluent country, and even the poorest person, look, if you can't get a job, then there is social welfare. People can claim unemployment benefit. Now, it's not a great amount of money, but it's enough to survive on. It's enough to buy the basics. So I don't think that people saying that, oh well, we need to tackle poverty because that's the cause of crime. I don't agree with it. Now, my mum grew up on a council estate. Now, I guess a council estate is social housing. So if you live in the United States or if you live somewhere else, you might not know what a council house is, but it's social housing. So my mum grew up quite poor. Her parents grew up on a council estate, and she told me that I think her dad would have one pair of shoes, and then when the shoes had holes in them, they were that poor that he would put cardboard in the shoes. And they didn't commit crimes, they weren't going out stabbing people for, whatever, holding people up with knives and all that. So I don't think it's an excuse, and nobody in London or in England is that poor that they're not holding somebody up so they can go and buy a loaf of bread, or they're not stealing from people so they can go and buy food. It's crime, isn't it? It's and some of these people are walking around with Adidas trainers and Nike and all this. They're not poor people, so I don't think, like I said, using poverty as an excuse for why people commit crimes. No, it's not. It's not tackling the issue. It's not addressing the real problem. That people are doing bad things and they're not taking responsibility for their actions. Now, saying that, I do think it's good to have empathy for people. There's that saying, isn't there? Walk a mile in my shoes. Some of these people do have very bad upbringings. Some of them do grow up with poverty, bad education, bad parenting. But I do think some of it's a cultural thing as well. I think the ideas that you put into your mind day after day can affect you. Now, what I mean by that is if you're constantly listening to negative music from an early age, constantly listening to that. Now, I'm not blaming this on music. I'm not blaming crime on negative music as such, but as part of a bigger package. So, for example, these people are taking drugs. They're listening to gangster rap. They are growing up in a society where people idolise bad people, really. They idolise gangsters and that culture. So if you take all these factors together, it is going to influence somebody's consciousness and their personality. There's no doubt about it. The ideas that we take into our mind do influence us. Advertisers know that. Advertisers know that if they keep repeating an advert, it's going to have an effect. They wouldn't waste the money, would they? Advertisers would not waste millions of dollars on these adverts that last a couple of minutes, and they play them in the commercials on sporting events. Like in America, it'll be Super Bowl, or here we'll have whatever it is, the FA Cup or whatever, and they'll have adverts that last a couple of minutes, and they'll pay really good money. Now, if it had no effect, if the ideas that you take in visually and audio-wise, if it had no effect on people, advertisers would just give up. So my point is, of course, things influence us. We might be casual about it and say, "Oh no, it doesn't have any effect on me. I'm too cool for that. I'm too cool to be affected by this music or whatever." But so it's not an excuse. People can't turn around and say, "Oh, I watched a bad movie and it made me do something bad, or it made me commit a crime." But I do say that the ideas that we take into our mind affect us. So leading back to what I started off talking about, to do with crime, I don't think we can blame poverty, but we need to look at the other factors, which is people's upbringings, their parenting. Is their mum and dad around? Or did they grow up in a house with no discipline, with no rules? Are they growing up in a society and a neighbourhood, and are they mixing with negative people? Because London itself has got a big problem, like I was mentioning before, with knife crime. There's been a lot of murders. It's got a really big problem with gangs, with drugs, drug dealing, with that whole culture of, I don't know what it is, just people, I don't know, I think they're probably too soft on these people as well. And they're doing stop and search. The police are doing something called stop and search, where they'll stop somebody and search them for weapons and all that, which I think is a good thing. Now, some people might feel like they're being victimised and that the police are being racist for doing it, because I believe they're stopping quite a lot of young black people. And I think a lot of the crimes have been done by that demographic. And that's a fact. That's not being racist or anything like that. So I think the police, I don't know, it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's tricky being a police officer. It's a thankless job. You know, it's a very hard job. It's easy to criticise the police, but we do need some sort of law enforcement. I don't know what the solution is to this knife crime, but saying poverty, blaming it on poverty and making it a political thing, blaming the opposition, you know, the Labour Party blaming the Conservatives government for it, and vice versa, and it's playing the blame game, isn't it? You're always blaming poverty, and I don't think it's to do with poverty. There's many people that are out of work, that are unemployed, and they're not going around stabbing people or committing crimes. They're not doing it. They're living simply. They're not buying. They can't afford to buy brand new Nike trainers, or the latest fashion. They can't afford to. They survive on the benefits until they get a job. They're not committing crimes. So to use poverty as a reason is not addressing the issue. It's not addressing the issue at all. I think they need to be much tougher. They need to educate people, and it needs to start young. It needs to start in schools. We need to stop glamorising violence. Teach people to think. Teach children to think for themselves and to not follow the herd. To just not to glamorise the violent culture, and to educate people. Really, that's the solution. And also, to a deterrent is to be very, very strict. If it means sending people to prison for quite a long time, and not just sending them to prison, but educating them in prison and giving them some hope and stuff, because there's a lot of there's a lot of talk, but they need to try something different. And like I say, you can't just blame it on poverty. You can't, because this country is rich compared to a lot of countries out there in the world where people don't have clean drinking water, they don't have enough food, there isn't any social benefits, people are living on the streets and stuff. So we have homelessness here, but I don't think it's homeless people that are doing these knife attacks in London. So that's not really an excuse. That's some of my thoughts on that, and I'd like to know some of your comments if you've made it this far. And thanks for listening.